Hi, Erik Linask here. We are in the TMC Newsroom. My guest on today's program from Primary Data is Lance Smith. He is Primary Data CEO. Lance, thanks for joining me. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure.
So I do want to get into a bit of a conversation about primary data, and I thought the best place to start is to kind of go back in time a little bit to your days prior to primary data at Fusion.io and some of the things that you did there and kind of how that led to primary data.
Fusion was a fantastic experience. We created a new technology where we actually utilized off-the-shelf, commercially available NAND flash and turned it into a new memory tier that we put into the server. And what was so unique about that is that we learned one thing about those applications that were running on those servers. If you could make the storage faster and reduce its latency, you could make that application run exponentially faster. We had customers, when we applied this technology, to see 10 times the level of application performance and get a huge benefit from that. Well, I guess to your point, some of the lessons that we learned from there was actually also interesting because it made a challenge to sell that type of technology. You had to make sure that the customer could get their money's worth out of the flash that they spent on. But it also introduced this dynamic range of storage media that now was available to our customers.
Because flash storage is certainly not cheap.
It wasn't cheap. It was very fast. It was smaller in size compared to primary storage. And it could offer a huge benefit, but it was harder to manage. You had to manually go and configure these systems to make use of the flash in that server while making use of the centralized storage.
And I imagine that creates a situation where it's very easy to lose track of data and files.
Well, what ended up happening is that IT would kind of give up. They won't be able to delete information that was kind of older and not really used, or move data into other locations that maybe were less expensive to sort of manage. What would end up happening is that they would instantiate more copies of their servers, hardware, larger footprints, spending more money. Their CapEx expenditures would go up, their cost to manage it, and the amount of power that would take to run the equipment. It continued to grow and grow. And then we got one other sort of attribute that sort of showed up in the middle of all of this, the cloud. Mm-hmm. It added another dimension. So we had very fast, expensive storage in the server. We had the more economical centralized storage, whether it be a NAS or a SAN storage. And then we had the cloud, this object store that was super low cost, but not particularly as fast.
And certainly there's a time and a place for each one of those. But as you said, now you've created a situation where you have to be able to work with all three of those concurrently. And effectively you created a problem, and now you've solved it, or at least started solving it with primary data. Tell me about how you've done that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We use this experience to create the technology, solve this real problem. How do you manage it so that it's not a manual process, that it's automated and dynamic and dealing with all of the business needs? And so at Primary Data, we came up with this concept of, well, what if you put the data where it's needed and when it's needed? So there's data mobility. And we have a technology that's underneath called data virtualization. And what we allow is the file itself to have a logical view to these applications so that you could place it in any storage element that happened to exist in an IT's environment. And in doing so now, IT can take advantage of very fast, expensive storage, where they needed it, maintain the centralized storage. They could expand it when they wanted to, and transparently, so that it had complete uninterrupted service. But then when they had too much data and they know they didn't want to delete it, or they have to try to adhere to a corporate's governance, then they needed to save that information and have it online all the time. Then they'll put it over into cloud. And we do this now transparently. This data mobility allows us to move from each different type of storage when it's needed.
And this is all done via an automated process.
Yeah, completely. In fact, it's policy driven. So we actually have several elements that we've created in this solution. One of them is called the Data Director. And the Data Director is a device that software that's running that manages all the metadata, that basically describes all of the files and data that you have in your system. And we have a policy engine that runs on top of that. And it looks at heat maps, it looks at usages of files, and it looks at what's most active, what is least active, or through policy, say maybe through time or through activity, where to place these files in the system. because that's the key to success here. IT and these DBAs, these database administrators, want to ensure that they meet their service levels. There's a certain level of performance that is required by each one of these applications. In the past, or what they do today, they have to drop more hardware in. When they have to over-provision, cost them a lot of money, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem, because by the time IT understands that there's a problem, it's too late. Now they're having to go acquire and procure more equipment, and in the meantime, the service performance is down, the service levels are not being met, and they're trying to figure out how to dynamically move information or load balance it in their data center to make it work. We do it automatically, and the data director helps us do this.
So when you're talking about this all being policy-driven, can you handle sort of a hierarchy of policies based on various attributes, whether it's security or the heat maps that you talked about, or compliance, or different user categories, or what have you?
We have flexibility for IT to describe any type of policy they want to add to a file or a storage usage. It could be security-based. Maybe it's accessibility from a physical storage. Maybe they don't want information put into the cloud. They only want to keep it in their local on-premise storage. Maybe it is, in fact, cost and having to keep old email files. Maybe after 1 or 2 years, you push it into the cloud. Maybe after 5 years, you delete them. So then you no longer have to try to maintain everything and then manually trying to improve your data center economics by deleting files that you don't know exist anymore because you've lost track of them.
What types of organizations, or are there particular verticals or industries that are ideally suited for you right now?
Well, there's an initial focus for primary data. We like what we term as the commercial R&D space. These are environments that, I mean, it's very, very, very common ones: oil and gas, bioinformatica, EDA, CAE, media and entertainment. They have environments that are both non-production, where they're doing their development work, and then production environment. And what we found successes in our early proof of concepts is that the customer likes the idea of a couple things. One, they can do these developments offline, and then when they want to take it to production, it's a simple migration. They use our data mobility to move the data in the right place seamlessly and keep those applications continuing to run as they go from the prototype stage to the production stage. We've also found those same customers, as they want to expand their capability, whether capacity or performance, it's seamless to them for add any third-party store. So we're completely agnostic when it comes to storage protocols or storage providers. You can use several different providers with SAN or block-based or file-based or object-based. We're agnostic to that, so that sort of growth side of it was a big deal for them. And then from their budget perspective, they took a look at the technology and said, well, we only have so many dollars to deal with, but we have nice fast storage here, we have slower storage here. How can I make the best use of it and have those economics improve and benefit them? And the initial experience was pretty positive.
Seems also like an ideal application for, speaking of heat maps, a hot topic of late, certainly IoT and mobile application market, where you have exactly that kind of a scenario where you've got to be able to move between development and production environments.
Well, I'll tell you what's really interesting about the Internet of Things and mobile devices. We create just a tremendous amount of data, this data deluge as people speak to it. One thing we've observed in those environments is that information is created, and very quickly, days, hours, minutes, it's not used much anymore. So about 80% of this information that's being stored on these primary data is cold. And although people want to have access to it, a couple of years down the road, they want to look up that photo or they want to look at that conversation or that article, but right now they don't need it. And if you place it on your primary storage, it's costing you money and capacity. And then you have new or hot data that's coming in. Now this is a lot of data, millions and millions of devices that are running in parallel. That's the beauty of this technology. As that information gets cold and you want to keep it, you can move it to a less expensive, larger capacity storage. May not be as fast, but okay, it's still available online.
So what's sort of the the strategy for bringing this to prospective customers? Is it an efficiency issue? Is it a cost benefit? Is it ROI? How do you attack that?
You know, it's all of the above. There are customers that are worried about their total cost of ownership. They're worried about, you know, return on their investments, not just from a primary data perspective, but all the investments that they've made. They have a number of capital expenditures that they've made. They want to get best use of that, and they want to economically grow and manage that business and scale it. Our technology helps them to do that. So when they take a look at their budgets, whether in good times, you know, or bad economic times, they want to either get more performance if they can afford it, or they want to get the most performance for what they have. And so it depends on the customer. Some customers have a drive to have the highest level of service and capacity for a number of simultaneous users. Others, they have a very narrow, well-defined budget, and they got to fit within that. We can get them more for less.
Looking forward, is there sort of a strategic outlook or a strategic map of activities that you can talk to us about at this point?
Yeah, primary data, we're still in our development phase. We're early stages for a company. Last year, we were doing our first proof of concept to prove these core technologies and went to real customers in each one of these verticals that we talked about. And they've asked us to add more features and functions. Later this year, we plan on going into open beta and announce the product and then go full release in the fourth quarter of this year.
Excellent. Sounds very exciting. We look forward to sharing more as some of those things take place. In the TMC Newsroom, I'm Erik Linask. Lance, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.